Mishnah says a very interesting chidush, that even though it's tahar, even though the truma is tahar, it's pure, you still cannot give it to you still can't use it. The Kohen who gets his truma, he cannot use the truma for the mitzvah of etrog. And the Gemara wants to understand why not. Why is he restricted? Why is the Kohen restricted from using the truma for his mitzvah of etrog? But if you're a Kohen, you own it. I mean, I gave it to you. Like you're my Kohen. If you're my Kohen, now you own it. It's lachem, lekachtem lachem. So what's the issue? So the Gemara says there are two concerns. There's two possible issues. The Gemara says, what are they? So pligi bar Rav Ami v'Rav Asi. There's a machlokas, a dispute between two rabbis, Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Chad Amar Mashira. One says the issue is because you are preparing. The word hechsher, kosher, comes from the word preparation. In order for meat to be kosher meat, you have to prepare it. You have to soak it. You have to soak the meat for a half hour to get out the blood. You have to salt it, leave it in the salt for an hour to draw out the blood, and then you wash it, then you hose it afterwards. That prepares the meat for you to eat. So there's something called tumah. For a food to become contaminated, it only becomes contaminated if it was prepared first, which means it has to come in contact with a liquid. There's 7 liquids that could possibly prepare a food to be able to receive contamination. If a food does not come in contact with liquid, let's say you go ahead and you took a etrog from a tree, and then subsequently a dead mouse touches the etrog does not become contaminated. Even though it's a dead mouse, why doesn't it become contaminated? Because the etrog if it never came in contact with water post the time it was cut, harvested. Meaning the fact anything while it's attached to the tree, even though it rains on the tree, it does not, that water that goes onto an item when the item is attached to a tree does not prepare the item for contamination. It's only once the food is detached from the tree and then the rain goes on it or certain other liquids would go on it, will it prepare it for contamination. Now, truma has a special halacha that you cannot make it tameh. You cannot contaminate truma. The Kohen has to be very careful that truma does not become contaminated. And Rashi actually brings a pasuk from the Torah, Mishmeret Trumati. The Torah says you have to be mishma. You have to make a shimur. You have to protect. You have to guard the truma. In life, there's certain things you have to guard. People have guards on their house, at affairs. You have to guard the truma. What does it mean to guard the truma? Don't cause the truma to become contaminated. Now, when you take a lulav, it was very common in the old days. They would take the lulav and put it back into water, to keep it fresh. Now, so if you're going to go ahead and do the mitzvah of lulav and etrog, it's most likely your hands will be wet from the lulav, and those wet hands will come in contact with the etrog, and therefore it would prepare the etrog for possible becoming contaminated in the future. And we want to protect you that you shouldn't get that close to contamination. If you don't come in contact with the water, if you don't, then you won't come in contact with, then the etrog won't become contaminated. So therefore, to ensure that, we say, don't use an etrog of truma, because if you use an etrog of truma, what's going to happen? Most likely, that etrog is going to come in contact with water as a result of the lulav. And therefore, you're just making it one step closer. Good morning, Michael.
Morning, Rabbi. Chodesh Tov.
Well, Chodesh Tov. Michael, you could tell Jaime that we miss him, right?
That's Hashem.
Yeah, he's not here. It's still early in the class, so
he has time. He has time.
Yeah. So we're on Lamed Hey Amud Beis. We're on 35b, 35b1. In the Gemara on the right side, we're about 10 lines from the top. We're trying to explain why, when you have Truma Torah, Truma that is pure, why is it that you cannot, first of all, Chodesh Tov, everybody. First of all, why can't you use, Morning Morris, Chodesh Tov, why can't you use Truma that's Tahor for the mitzvah of Etrog, right? That's the issue over here. Morris, you hear the issue? I remind you to say Birkat Torah, right? Okay, so the Gemara now is going to explain two reasons. The first reason is Nesha Machshira, because you are preparing the Truma to become susceptible to possibly becoming contaminated in the future. And we don't want Truma to be that close to becoming contaminated. If you keep it away from water, then it won't have the ability to become contaminated. And if you're going to use an etrog of Truma, so we said as a result of putting the lulav back in the water to keep the lulav fresh, your hands will become wet from the lulav, and then it'll touch the etrog. And then once the water touches the etrog, then that will prepare it for possibly in the future being able to become contaminated through some certain things that will contaminate it. And we have a special mitzvah to guard the truma, that the truma should not become contaminated. So the Gemara says, and one opinion says, there's a different reason why you should not use an etrog of truma. You hear that, Morris? It's a truma etrog. You gave to the Kohen. You separated truma. What's the issue? We're on 35b1 on the right side. Pretty much almost near the last paragraph. You're going to cause the etrog. The etrog, when you handle an etrog, you're constantly handling it. The wear and tear of handling the etrog could diminish. To diminish the etrog. The etrog gets a little smaller as a result of that. The outside peel, or Rashi says, it becomes disgusting with the constant handling of the people's handling it. It affects the outer shell, and it becomes it becomes a little it becomes ruined a little bit through the wear and the tear, and as a result of that, you're not allowed to cause a loss. You can't take truma and just waste it or diminish it, lower its size. And the concern is that if you're going to go ahead and use the etrog, if you're going to use the etrog of truma for the mitzvah, there is that concern that you are going to hurt, or so to speak. Maybe by the time you get to the seventh day of the holiday, you're 7 days in, and you've been giving your etrog to many people to use, and so maybe by the time the seventh day comes, the etrog will have been, through the handling, it's not in the same shape, the same condition that it was when you started out, and the fact that it's truma, you can't do something to lessen, to make smaller the item. If you look, look at the note number 6, how they are learning it. You see, they're learning The outer peel acquires a brownish discoloration as a result of being held in the hand for a long time. See, they're learning that it becomes, as a result of the handling, there comes a color change to the etrog. And as the color change to the etrog, then they'll discard it. And if the etrog is truma, you have to save it that it should be eaten. And they said, since the peel will be ruined, if the etrog is used for the mitzvah, you can't forbids using the etrog of truma. So is it because there's it's getting smaller in size, the etrog, through the handling, like it rubs away of some of the surface? Is that the issue, or is the issue more that it's just going to lose its beauty as a result of the handling, and you're going to not eat the peel because you're not. If let's say after the holiday, after the holiday is over, you could eat the etrog. And if it's truma, it's supposed to be eaten, but you're not going to eat it. What are you going to do with it if it's going to be if it's going to be affected? It's going to be damaged to all the handling of the etrog. You're not going to come to eat it. If you're not going to come to eat it, then you're going to throw it out in the garbage. But you can't do that. It's truma. You can't throw away the peel of the truma. You can't. Right. So exactly. So there's two possible concerns from one of Mr. Haber. And they're arguing regarding those possible concerns. And one rabbi says this is the issue. The other rabbi says, no, this is the issue. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? At the end of the day, you can't use an etrog of truma. Whether the reason is, we're talking, Mr. Haber, about an etrog of truma, where the Mishnah says, you should not take an etrog of truma. You're a kohen. You got the truma. You got that 2% as a kohen, but you should not use it for the mitzvah of etrog. And the Gemara gives two reasons. One reason is because if you use it for etrog, because the lulav, a lot of times you keep fresh the lulav by putting it into a thing of water, pail of water, and that water will come in contact with the etrog as a result of it's on the lulav. The lulav is wet, the etrog will be wet, and therefore, as a result of that, that prepares the wetness that comes in contact with the etrog, will prepare the etrog for the possibility of being able to become contaminated in the future. And we don't want you to do that step. We want you to stay away from preparing something for possible contamination. And the second reason we just said is because the handling throughout the holiday, the constant handling of the etrog, by the time the seventh day of the holiday is over, there's a concern that outer peel, that the outer, the most outer part of the etrog will become not so pretty as a result of all the handling. And there's a concern that you're going to go ahead and throw out that peel, and it's truma, it can't be thrown out. So therefore, we want to prevent you, and therefore, in order to ensure that won't happen, we say don't use the etrog of truma, because through its use, you're going to put the etrog in a certain state that possibly people will throw out that peel, and that peel is truma peel. You can't throw out truma peel. Is that clear? So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina." What's the difference in the two opinions? My benayu kego shekara lashem chutz meklipata. Let's say you're the Yisrael, and you as the Yisrael, you have to separate the truma. You have to give to the kohen. But you said, I'm going to make this etrog truma, but I want everything about this etrog should be truma. Good morning, Max, except the outer peel of the etrog. Except the outer peel of the etrog. You hear that, Morris? He says the outer peel. I get two Morrises on the only one Morris there. You get. If I say I want the whole etrog to be truma except the outer peel, so what happens? If the concern is that through the handling of the etrog, the etrog gets, the peel gets ruined. There's a concern, and you might throw out the peel. But here, there's no concern because the peel was not sanctified. You did not. You said that the peel did not become truma. You only call truma on everything else about the etrog. So 99% of the etrog is truma, but the peel is not. So if the peel is not truma, so do we care if the peel?
Because we don't eat the peel because the peel's garbage.
What do you say?
In other words, is the peel like something that we discard, like an orange? The peel, we don't eat the peel.
Right. The peel of the etrog is more of a peel that people do eat. Like when you first would buy, if you eat an etrog, you would eat the peel. I would think. Would people eat the peel of the etrog?
I hear. I'm not debating that, but I'm just, in other words, what's the purpose? How could you call something not tameh, not part of something? It's a shell. That's how it's not part of something.
Right. So, but we're saying over here that you have the ability to make this etrog, the peel, not truma,
of course,
and the rest of the etrog truma. So you're correct, Michael. Regarding
I'm trying to think the logic of the rabbis, how they have that.
Right. So right. I'll tell you where you're right. When it comes to the contamination concern, right? The concern that if you're going to go ahead and use an etrog of truma for the mitzvah, it's going to become wet as a result of the handling the lulav, because the lulav you put in the bucket of water. So even if you did not sanctify, you did not make truma the outer shell, and the outer shell is not truma, but the water will touch the outer shell. It's still going to be it's still susceptible to contamination because even if the peel is not truma, but the 99% of the etrog is truma, if the peel becomes wet, the etrog is susceptible to contamination. And therefore, susceptible to contamination, we do not want you to create a food that's truma, that it should be already ready for contamination. We want
That's why we wash Pesach, karpas, we wash on the celery. We wash to keep the tuma because we're dipping it in water.
Well, because we don't want our hands, right? We want to make it pure our hands. So that's why the Gemara says, according to the reason, if you're concerned about the preparing of a contamination, there's still a concern, even when he made 99% of it truma and the shell is not truma, there's still a concern that by the fact that 99% of the food is truma, it will still come in contact with water, and it'll prepare the rest of the etrog for possible contamination. And therefore, if you said I want the whole thing to be truma except the peel, you still can't use that etrog. You still shouldn't use that etrog because if you use that etrog, you're going to make it. It's going to get wet, and it's going to be prepared to receive contamination. We said before, Max, that a food item cannot receive contamination once it's cut from the tree unless it comes in contact with any one of certain 7 liquids. So therefore, and the Kohen has a responsibility to guard that it should not become contaminated. So therefore, you don't allow these liquids to come in contact with truma.
Tell us the liquids, Rabbi.
Yeah, so we know blood is one of them. We know water is one of them. Honey is one of them. There's what do you say?
Milk.
Oil. Milk is one. Yeah, the whole listing of one of the seven liquids.
It's the acronym. I forgot the acronym. It's an acronym.
Yes, any of the certain 7 liquids that I presume the most common liquid that will come in contact with the food.
Water, honey, milk, oil. Wine.
Blood.
Wine.
Yeah, yayin. Oil.
Wine.
You said oil.
Oil. I said oil. Up to the last one. I got one left.
You have to look up the Mishnah. Okay. But that's what the Gemara said. If the concern is that you're making it prepared for contamination, the concern still applies even when the case is that you did not call the truma on the outside on the shell. You said everything is truma except the outside. There's still a concern you're preparing it. But point to the opinion that says you are ruining the concern is by handling the etrog, the outer shell becomes ruined, and you're going to go ahead and throw it out, and therefore you're wasting truma. That concern doesn't apply if you made everything truma except the outer peel. Because then, so why you throw out the peel? You can throw out the peel. It's not truma. So therefore, that's what the Gemara says, the difference between the two opinions. Now we're turning to page 35. 35 at all 7, Michael.
I got all 7. Blood,
yes.
Milk, honey, water. Blood, milk, honey, water, oil, wine. And I'm short one. I wrote milk twice.
Okay.
I'm gonna figure out the last one. I'll figure out the last one.
I mean, I don't know if it's yeah, I could suggest something, but I don't want to suggest it. Okay. So the Gemara says the following. Now the Gemara continues. But at the end of the day, the Mishnah states, if you went ahead and you used this etrog of truma, right? Let's say the etrog of truma that the Mishnah says you shouldn't use. The whole etrog is truma. If you went ahead and you used it, you get credit for the mitzvah. Even
for
though
the first day. For the first day.
I mean,
because the first day is the fiyuv. The oraita is the first day.
Right, but you the reasons of the Gemara would apply throughout the holiday. You should. Good morning, Mark. Good to see you. The reason should apply. What do you say?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, the reason should apply throughout the holiday that you should not be able to use an etrog of truma. But if you went ahead and you did use an etrog of truma, and it was tahar, it was pure, after the fact, you will get credit for the mitzvah. You do not have to redo it. Now, that's what the Gemara says. Now the Gemara says, "V'nata k'sheira." If you went ahead and you took the estrog of truma, you get credit. K'sheira. Morning, boker tov. So remind you to say Birkat Torah before the learning. If just make sure you say that bracha shekil shel mitzvot v'sivnasok with the Torah v'shebacha banu. I just remind everybody when they come in, you know, at the beginning until you come for a certain amount of time, then I'll stop reminding. Okay, so we have the law that if you take truma, that's tahor, truma that is pure, and the Kohen, you gave the Kohen the truma, and he used. The Mishnah said there are certain reasons why he should not use it. We just stated a couple of reasons why. An etrog that's truma, you should not use for the mitzvah of etrog. Certain safeguards, the Gemara says. But if you went in and you did it, you get credit for the mitzvah. You don't have to redo the mitzvah. And the Gemara...
Rabbi, vinegar. Vinegar is the last one.
Oh, very good. Chometz, very good. Now, the question is, why is this different than truma that's not pure? We said if truma became contaminated, you cannot use that etrog. If the etrog became contaminated, it was truma and it became contaminated, you cannot use it for the mitzvah. However, truma that did not become contaminated, you could use for the mitzvah. I mean, you get credit for the mitzvah. What's the difference? So the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, L'man diyama mibnei she'ein bo het achila. There was an opinion that says if you have an etrog of arla, a tree from the first 3 years, you're not allowed to use the food of a tree the first 3 years you plant the tree, whether you plant it in Israel, you plant it in New Jersey, you plant a tree, you cannot use the fruit from that tree. And we said that's why you can't, since you can't eat it, therefore you can't get credit for the mitzvah of etrog with something that you can't eat. Because the Torah says the etrog has to be lachem. It has to be something that's yours. You can eat it, according to that opinion. If you can't eat it, it's not called yours. It's not enough yours that you should be able to fulfill the mitzvah of etrog. And therefore, etrog of orla, you cannot get credit. But truma, etrog of truma, I have a right to eat it. It's truma, the Kohen could eat it. So since the Kohen could eat it, so therefore I get credit if I went ahead and I use an etrog of truma. Good morning, Jaime. We are on 35b2. Now, there was a different opinion. There was a second opinion that says Orla, a tree that proves the produce of an Orla tree, of a new tree, of its first 3 years, I don't have ownership. I don't have financial value in this Orla tree because I'm not allowed to have benefit from an Orla tree. Not only I can't eat the fruit of a tree in the first 3 years, I can't benefit. I can't sell it. I can't have benefit from an Orla tree. So therefore, however, Truma, harayesh bo din mamon. Truma, I have the ability to sell it. You could give it to us. You can make it betroth a woman, get married with the truma, right? You could give the truma to her.
Business with the currently truma what you have.
Right. You can sell it. We said it says truma is less expensive. By the way, if you sell truma, it's less expensive than regular food. Why? Because the demand, supply and demand. There's only a certain amount of people who could consume truma. The market.
Rashi has a good note, 12. Small
okay,
note.
We'll look at Rashi in a minute because the market for truma is only kohanim could eat it. So when you have a product that only can be eaten by a small amount of people, the demand is low. And demand is low, the price is what is lower, right, Mr. Haber? And therefore, but the fact is, it has din mamon. Truma has a value. And therefore, it's called lachem. It belongs to you. You have monetary power in that truma. Therefore, if you went ahead and you used the truma for the mitzvah, an etrog that was from the truma. Again, the truma is the first thing when you produce, you take off and you separate and you give to the kohen. The average person would give 2% of his crop to the kohen. You had 100 etrogim, you would give 2%. 2 etrogim, not so much, right? You gave two etrogim to the Kohen. Remember, you had other things. You got to give Ralph, you got to give the Levi 10%. He gets a much bigger share of the etrogim. So now Michael said, let's look at the Rashi. So Rashi said, like I said, a Kohen can marry a woman with the etrog. You give us why? I would recommend it. Good morning. I would not recommend you to marry using, instead of giving her a ring, you give her an etrog. I mean, etrog is nice and pretty, but I don't recommend that. That's what you should do to betroth your wife, right? And Rashi also says, a Yisrael Nami, a non-Kohen. If the Kohen gave him, if the Kohen gifted, I'm not a Kohen, but if Mr. Cohen gives me a gift of an etrog, and if gives any non-Kohen a gift of an etrog, and that person wants to use that etrog to betroth a woman, he could go ahead and do it. He could sell it to Kohanim. You could do some business with the etrog, like the rabbi said, and you keep the money from that. So therefore, at the end of the day, an etrog, an etrog that of truma, that is tahor, that is pure, you could, if you went ahead and you used it, you get credit for the mitzvah. Now shel demai. The Mishnah says, what about an etrog of demai? Now, what is demai? Demai is an acronym for the word da-mai. What is the status of this food? I went ahead, I bought produce from a non-educated Jew. The non-educated Jews back then, we're going back time of the Mishnah, they, truma 2%. They would give the two etrogim on 100. They would give, but there was a minority and the majority gave to Ralph. They gave to Levi also, but there was a minority of them that did not give the Levi. Did not 10%. They didn't give the 10%, and that's a big problem because food that wasn't tithe is called tevel. It's forbidden. I can't eat food that was not we can't eat food that the tithes weren't taken off. That food is forbidden. That food is called tevel. So what do I do if I go in and I buy produce from the non-educated Jew? or if do I have to take off the tithe? So, based on the general law that the majority of the people took off tithe, so technically, if you go after the majority, maybe on a Torah level, I could rely that the food that I bought was from the majority of the people, and that do take off. The majority of that group does take off tithes, but because there's a minority that doesn't take off the tithes, and the consequences are very great. If I eat food that tithes weren't taken off, the rabbi said that I the buyer should take off the tithe. I'll separate the 10% for the Levi, but technically I don't have to give it to the Levi, because now there's a monetary question. Who does this 10% belong to? Once I separated it, the food now no longer, if it was not tithe, and now this food now it was tithe. But now the question is, does it belong to Ralph Batesh or Mr. Levine? The late Mr. Levine is the Levi's, right? I don't know if they have too many Levines in the community, but Levine, Mr. Levy. Levy is a common name in the community. Mr. Levy, the Levi. If the Levi says, Rabbi, you're going to give me your tithe, I can say, prove it to me that it wasn't already taken off. Maybe you already got. Maybe the Levi tribe already received its maaseh, and this was not necessary to be taken off for you. So technically, I don't have to give the actual tithe to the Levi, because that's a monetary question, and you say it was not taken off. Maybe it was taken. You're suggesting you don't know what happened here. Therefore, when you have a question of money, we say hamotzi mechavero. If you want to say that money belongs to you, and the money is by me, you have to prove that the money belongs to you. So therefore, you will not be able to. You will not be able to claim that I have to give you that 10%. But that's now the question is, I'm supposed to separate the maaseh on this etrog. If I bought etrogim from this non-educated Jew, I'm supposed to go ahead and separate the tithe. But what happened at the 10%? Make the move of separating the 10%. But what about if I did not make the move? I didn't separate it. I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and I used it for the mitzvah of etrog. And I went ahead and I took this etrog on the holiday of Sukkot, and this etrog was some produce that I bought from an uneducated Jew, and were concerned that maybe he did not take off the tithe, and I did, and I'm supposed to separate them, but I didn't do that yet, and I used it for the mitzvah of etrog. Do I got to redo it or not? So that was the machloket in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and Beit Shammai says it's invalid, and Beit Hillel says it is valid. You get credit for the mitzvah. You do not have to redo it according to Beit Hillel. You shouldn't have done that. Because you're supposed to take off the tithe. You're not supposed to be using it without taking off the tithe. But after the fact, Beit Hillel said you don't have to redo it. Tomorrow, B'ezras Hashem, we're going to look into understanding what is the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, why Beit Hillel said it's good. At the end of the day, if I can't eat it until I separated the tithe, why is it good? So we'll see tomorrow.
Take care, Rabbi. Chodesh Tov,
Chodesh Tov, everyone.
Chodesh Tov, everybody.
Take care.
My son will seem to be also that. Will also be. Yeah, we're not taking on my step. Yeah, that's why the Chum said you have to separate the 10%. No. I'm saying when you're not sure if he took off the mice or not,